it is a great honor and a privilege to introduce Liane Grunberg Wakabayashi and with Leah Abromowitz, two very prominent and esteemed authors. And you met at a Jewish women's writing conference in Hanover.
That's right.
How long ago was this?
Was it 3 years ago? We were seated next to each other, and we got chatting, and I was interested in Leah's story. She was a writer who also was painting, and I said, I'm a writer that also paints, so that kind of opened up conversation. The fact that she spoke fluent English was very helpful, being new to Israel.
And I went to one of her groups for women who like to paint, and I enjoyed it so much that I kept the picture that I did next to the phone for about 2 years.
and Leah, that you drew that picture on the cover of your book.
Yeah, that's the picture of my husband.
Wow. So, Leah, you are the founder of Melabev, and Liane, you are such an amazing journalist as well, and I want to give over to both of you.
And you are a great dentist and interviewer, Les. We've got to put it all together. that in Israel, these kind of connections happen naturally, because we can't be pegged into a little box. We can't just define ourselves, oh, I'm a writer, I'm a dentist, I'm a social worker. We're so much bigger than that. That's the fascination of getting to know each other here. For instance, when I met Leah, I thought, I hope she's not a lonely old woman. I had no idea she had 13 children, 150 plus grandchildren, so many great grandchildren. You don't know who you're speaking to when you go to meet people in Israel, and that's so amazing about being here. It's not defined, it's not predictable. And so even though we've known each other for 3 years, there's so much to know about you, and it's very exciting to be given this opportunity to interview you and find out more.
Thank you.
And so I'd like to start by asking about Melabev, which, as a newcomer to Israel, I don't know what Melabev means. So,
in the word Melabev, you have the word lev. That's the heart. And we tried very hard to find something already in the early years when we first started that would give something very positive and very warm, and with the idea of trying to show empathy with the population that we took on to work with. So we said it's an acronym for Merkaz L'Tipul Bazaken Bakihila.
You could translate for us.
Which is a center for the elderly in the community. Notice, no word about dementia, no word about a stigma, something very positive, and the most important part, these people don't belong closed up in a room or in a hospital, that they belong in the community. And our experience has been that is the best situation for a person who has some kind of cognitive impairment.
Was that an enlightened way of thinking back then?
Depends to whom. I can't take credit for being the first founder of a network of daycare centers for people with cognitive impairment. I can say we were the first in Jerusalem, but I will say that for many people, how to relate to a person who has some memory problems, some decline in his mental function, is really a new approach.
When you started out, did you have people in Israel in your own family who you could learn from as well? Because oftentimes we do things because we know somebody in that situation.
It's a good question, because at the time I didn't think so. Well, all along I was taking care of my mom at home who had dementia. But I sort of made a distinction.
Really? That's so interesting.
Yeah. And I didn't really connect. I said there's a need because of the patients that I'm treating. I know that there is a lot of, as a social worker, we knew that there was something to offer a person after a stroke. We knew it was possible to help people with Parkinson. There were all kinds of things out there for people with other illnesses. But for dementia, there was actually nothing. We would say to the patient's family after he was diagnosed, you just have to take him home and take care of him. There's nothing I can suggest. So we opened our first daycare center for people who there was nothing for them in the community, except maybe sending them to a Mossad, to a hospital.
So to go back to your mother, because this is very interesting. At this time, your mother was blessed with seeing more and more grandchildren being born. So she was part of a busy, exciting household. How was that for her?
I think that the most amazing part of her illness, I told Les in our previous interview, that my father, who was all his life a big businessman and very much initiating activities outside the house and a big extrovert outside the house, all of a sudden became such a caring spouse. He used to sit with his wife, who was going downhill all the time, and sing songs from Germany and do exercises with her to keep her fit, because he was very fit, so he decided that she has to be fit long before we knew how important exercises are for people with dementia. And he changed completely. So I think that was the main thing. And then the fact that we took care of her between myself and my sister. There wasn't a burden, because you had a certain time that she would be with you in your house, and your whole family helped take care of her. And then she would be by your sister, who was right across the courtyard, who lived right next door. And we still keep up the tradition of every Friday night, I go up to my sister to say Shabbat Shalom from that time.
And she's living in the same courtyard? And
she's still living in the same courtyard. Less children in the house nowadays, but we still keep that tradition. So, as I say, we saw the need for something which was missing, and having a South African new immigrant who wanted to learn about Israel by doing, as a volunteer, we were able to start in one of the community centers a small little group. And we really didn't know what we were doing. We just played it by ear.
Was it once a week, or was it
twice a week? And the madrichot would bring the people in their own car to the place where they were holding this. Our first center was in the Ross Community Center in Givat Shaul. They unfortunately had a lot of changes of addresses in their history, but it's still going. And that same South African madricha is still working in Melabev.
Wow.
Anyway, so how do we know what kind of a program we should?
Yeah, what were the activities?
So we started with music, because everybody wrote about it and told us about it, and it was wonderful. Music is the best kli for a person, best tool for a person if he's at home with dementia, or if he's in a daycare center, or in a department in a hospital. And
is there a particular kind of music?
No, and this is the big thing. You have to find the right cultural situation. Now, if you have people from Morocco and people from Poland and people from America in the same group, you have a challenge. So what we did is we did a few Sephardi tunes and a few American old-timer tunes and a
politically correct, is that right? It had to be.
And it worked.
Because what you're saying is it has to be familiar.
Exactly.
You have to reach back into
Years
the past.
later, when I was no longer actually involved in Melabev, I'm still involved, but I wasn't really active, they did a study based on something that has been developed in the United States, where they took people who were very, very deteriorated, people who were sitting like this, and who barely lifted their eyes to look at anybody. And they asked the families what are their favorite tunes. And they put earphones on them and played those tunes. Invariably, the man either lifted their head, smiled, or sometimes started singing along with the records.
That's so.
It is. It's an amazing thing. We caught it on film, and in fact, there was another story. If there's time for stories.
Sure, of course.
His name was Rachamim, who had no family. We didn't know anything about him. And we figured that Rachamim maybe comes from a Sephardi background. It's a Sephardi name. So we put earphones on him with Sephardi music. No reaction. The guy who was in charge of this study, he said, he's not Sephardi. And they dug deeper, and they discovered that the man was an Arab. He took the name Rachamim to be more acceptable in the Jewish community. And when we put earphones on with Arabic music, the same reaction. He lifted his head, smiled from ear to ear. Rachamim, we know who you are from the music.
Isn't that something?
Isn't that wonderful? Then we got in touch with the Kupat Cholim Klali. We asked the head doctor of Kupat Cholim to come and take a look and give us some advice. This was in 1981. And we had one group of maybe 7 people who came twice a week. Dr. Potkaminer came, and she said, this is the right approach. I'm going to send you a physiotherapist from Kupat Cholim. So at her expense, everybody worked volunteer. We schnored. This physiotherapist came and did exercises. It was wonderful. Every time there was a meeting of the group, she came. Eventually, she wrote an article, and then she wrote a book about doing exercises with people who are...
Tell us some of the exercises, because I'm not that familiar with physiotherapy.
So she had them move all their limbs, get up, those that were able to get up, move around in an organized fashion, and do things that today you can get it on television. How to exercise older people. You have to be careful because they have all kinds of illnesses and so on. And that was the advantage, that we didn't just take anybody who was an exercise teacher. We took a trained physiotherapist who was able afterwards to write down her findings in a book.
That's fascinating.
Yeah. And eventually we did other things. So we also, we had art therapy, garden therapy, animal therapy, but always on a high level, not just any Tom Joe who came along and said, I like gardening, maybe I can do some garden therapy. It had to be somebody who was trained, who knew what therapy was about, who knew what older people were about, who knew what dementia was about. That was one of the highlights of Melabev all through the years, that we had very motivated workers, but also very professional workers. The people who came to work with us, especially in the entrepreneur period, we worked at all hours. You could call us at night, you could call us on Motzei Shabbat and so on. And in the beginning, Jackie would organize volunteer drivers who came and did what they could to make life more interesting and nicer. It was nicer to have a volunteer driver take you to the Moadon, to the Merkaz Yom rather than an Arab driver for a company.
How did it grow?
I think it grew because, one, there was a tremendous need. Two, we were able to raise funds. We eventually got support by the Memshalah. And three, that we had very good support from the community. We had wonderful friends of Melabev who used to organize all kinds of fundraisers and parlor meetings and gave of themselves without any consideration. And then it became what you would call memusad, institutionalized. And then, of course, it was a lot of reporting to the government and meeting certain criteria, which was a pain in the neck. You know, you'd have to have so many centimeters of floor space for so many people, and you had to have a program which was this, that, or the other. You had to have a building which had not only rooms for activities, but X bathrooms, X showers. You had to give showers. You had to have a room for pedicure and
yeah. How many centers now are there around
well,
Israel?
actually, it changed a bit. When I left, we had 8 centers, but then we bought a building of our own where we centralized 4 or 5 of the centers. So now there's one in Beit Shemesh, one for English speakers, one in Pisgat Ze'ev, and we have had in the past one for Arabs, which didn't really go. We're going to try again our second attempt at having one for French speakers, and we find that elderly people must have a program in their language. We can't expect people who've been speaking Arabic all their lives or Russian all their lives to change at the age that they get to when they have this problem. But we have now 3 Russian groups. They're still going strong.
Why do you think the Arab group didn't take off?
Because their tradition is that you don't send the parents out of the house, which really was sending them to a institution. But they interpreted it, or the community pressured them to interpret it, that you should take care of your elders in the home. It's your responsibility. It's your privilege, and you shouldn't send him out. Even so, I think the time will come when there will be an Arab group. Things are changing in the Arab community as well, don't you think? That things are
just scroll back. Just remind us how many days a week people go to Melabev.
Now we've changed quite a lot. They go from 8 o'clock in the morning, and they're picked up, and they come to the Moadon. They have breakfast there. If they need to have a shower, they can have a shower there. Then they have the program. They get a snack midday. They go on with the program. They have different levels of groups so that the people in the early stages are not together with the more advanced stages. And all that is possible because we now have several groups in the same place. And then before they're taken home, they have lunch.
This is daily they're going?
They go daily, and now we've started, since Corona, an afternoon program. There are people who I know who can't get up in the morning to be in the Melabev program early, so they can come at 12 o'clock, so they meet for lunch. And then those go home, and those stay on. Now, we started something from the beginning, which I also wrote an article about, that we start the day, first of all, introducing everybody again to remind them the names and just to get them to feel I'm important. You want to know who I am.
Yeah.
And we also start the day with prayers, not the full shacharit prayer, but, you know, key things. And somebody asked, well, you're trying to missionize these people, you know. No. The idea of prayer is that it's something which is, first of all, adult. It's mechubad. It's spiritual. It's something that most people have had experience with and they know. Even those who are not religious, who are not necessarily observing, they don't pray in the last 40 years of their lives, but they remember if they went to Cheder when they were young, or they had it from their grandparents. So it's something familiar. And when they meet something familiar, they feel so good about themselves. This is something I can do. Unfortunately, there are too many things that they can no longer do. They can no longer answer the phone, they can no longer pay bills, they can no longer do so many things in the house that they once did. But prayer, they know more or less. Except now and then we met a lady from a kibbutz, and I'm not going to daven, I'm going to sing Hatikva, which was very nice.
That's sweet, right? In a way it is.
That's her. And we said, go right ahead.
So if I can tell us, continue.
And we were talking about people who, when they retire, often come to the memory clinic because they feel that they're losing some of their memory, which could be, it's also because they're frightened that something's happening, they got time now to think about it. But more than that, they don't have stimulus. They don't have a purpose to get up in the morning. And a doctor that I frequently ask to give talks, who's very, very sold on this idea, says, you must give older people a schedule and a reason to get up in the morning and keep them busy. When you send people to be retired, that is a call, an invitation for dementia to come in.
That's very interesting.
Not everybody. I can show you people who don't do anything and are clear-minded, but it's much rarer.
In Japan, which has this population, the aging population is now more than the younger people. I think something like 60%.
It's called the inverted pyramid.
Right? You can't believe how active the old population is. That's when they start their hobbies, and that's
when they're 65, 70?
60 and beyond. They do their morning radio taiso. They're out on the streets.
That's right. Go to the 85-year-olds.
Doing their exercises. And
the 85 and 90-year-olds. The big problem starts then. A third of the 85 plus are going to get dementia, or have it now, or a type of dementia. Sometimes they can function all right because it's very mild, but
well, is it genetic? Is it dietary? Is it lifestyle?
Both.
It's all of those things.
All of those.
And is there a way to prevent it?
Would you like to get the Nobel Prize?
Well, you've had experience, and you
every few years somebody comes up with a new medicine. Now I heard they just accepted by the FDA medicine from China, which other people have said it doesn't work. They're so desperate for something. Even those medicines that our doctors now prescribe for people in the early stages, which will help you not overcome what's been lost, but will slow down the decline, works in 30% of the population. 60% take it and have no effect. And they would really, really like to find the golden grail here. Dr. Kaufman, who I mentioned before, is sold on the fact that he has the solution: keep people busy. That's the thing to do. And we've noticed that in Melabev, going back to the original subject, people who come to the program are stimulated, meet other people, have to use their social graces, things they don't do at home, have to get dressed, have to comb their hair, have to be ready, have a schedule, and especially are kept moving. So they're in a better situation than they were at home before they came to us.
Do you show movies, or?
Occasionally. That's not the main thing. We do a lot of celebrations. We find reasons under the ground for celebrating. Birthdays, anniversaries, new great-grandchildren, and make, a party out of everything.
And what about photographs?
Yes. In fact, we have a type of therapy called phototherapy.
Which means you bring in the photographs?
We show them photographs. We talk about the photographs. We have them photograph sometimes if they can. It's a whole new type of activity. We're always looking for new activities.
What about laughter therapy?
Yes.
Or the laughter? Is laughter built into it?
Who believe very, very strongly in laughter therapy. I don't, but some people do, and it's for sure that it's better than keeping people unhappy.
My understanding is that when you're laughing, your endorphins are moving, your hormones are activated.
Mm-hmm. I'm not sure it's the same hormones, but it's nice to have it. But one thing for sure has been proven by numerous research exercise. People who've never exercised and start only in their 70s maybe are in better shape mentally and physically than people who don't. And the same person who might have been very, very down, if he'll start exercising, has a better chance of, the more they exercise, not the more, they shouldn't overdo it. So there's different scales of how much exercise you should do, but it's definitely proven that exercise are important. So that's a part of all of our Melabev programs.
Very interesting. Leah, I love the book that you wrote, which is Aging in Wellness and Adversity. And one of the things that really struck me in reading it was that caregivers, family members, shouldn't be too hard on themselves and try to be superhuman and take on more than they can handle. This was and I was surprised by that. I thought that your message would be
devoted as much as you can.
Be devoted. This is your mother. This is your father. They deserve to go out of this life with you doing, being their ultimate caregiver, and you've got a very different message there.
Now I'm going to talk about my other hat.
Okay.
I, all through my career, have been doing support groups for caregivers. And I find that it is so important because, except for the very small minority of family members who either neglect or ignore their elderly parents or spouses or even brothers and sisters who need their help, all the others are prone to be over devoted, and to the detriment not only of themselves but to the detriment of the patient. Because what happens when you're doing more than you can possibly do, or when you're all the time mevaker, what's the word, mevaker? You're always you're always saying, "I'm not doing enough. I'm guilty of being too not involved enough." What happens then? You become burnt out more. You become less capable. You become more depressed. And when you're in that situation, it somehow will develop into the worst kind of caregiving that you can give. What happens, for instance, in the 1990s, a big subject that was being discussed all around was I don't know the word in alimut neged kshishim, being hitting or embarrassing or talking not nicely to old people. Abuse, got the word. Abuse against the elderly. And you find sometimes this abuse was in the homes where the people were the most caring, the most involved, the ones who gave up their own lives completely to take care, as you just mentioned, what you would expect, to their loved ones. And it comes from doing more than you are capable of doing. and not being aware of your own limitations. And these are the things that come up in our support groups all the time. Right now I'm leading 3 support groups, 2 for English speakers and 1 for Israeli speakers in Yad Sarah. I can't tell you the number of times that we have heard from people, oh, I'm such a bad caregiver, oh, I feel so bad, I feel so guilty that I'm doing this, that, and the other. And the first message we give is, you happen to be human. The second message we give, if you collapse because you're doing too much, that you're not finding outside interests that can give you a little bit of airing out. If you do that kind of thing, you will not, you'll go before the patient. What will happen then if you're sick, if you're hospitalized, if you die before he does? You have to take care of yourself physically, socially, and mentally in order to be able to be there for him or for her.
You spoke also in the book about abusive older people who...
Unfortunately, one of the aspects of the ill, I wouldn't even call it only those who are demented, that they become very enochi, very egotistic. They see themselves only. And sometimes the caregiver or sometimes somebody from outside has to make boundaries. This is unacceptable. I will not be in the room if you continue to yell at me. I will not come to visit you if you're not nice to me. Sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. Why doesn't it work? Because I forget what you said. But on the other hand, we have found this forgetfulness is also very helpful for our caregivers and for our staff, because sometimes people with dementia get confused or get fixated on some subject. I have to go home now, my children are waiting for me. I have to go home now, I have to go home now, I have to go home now. You can go crazy from that, right? You're home. So what do? You take them to the window. Look what a beautiful tree we have outside. There's there's tomatoes growing in the garden. Those birds. Would you like to go out and see the birds? Because one of the aspects that help us is they have very short memory. And they forget what they were worrying about.
Easily distracted.
They're easily distracted, that's the word. They're easily distracted. We use it all the time. Sometimes, if somebody's talking about their mother, they have to go home and take care of their mother or something. The madrichot in the Moadon will understand, oh, you loved your mother very much. Tell me about your mother. So the real reason that they're saying, I have to go home to my mother, is because their mother is embedded in their memory and they love to talk about it.
How do you help people distinguish between an old person with dementia and treating them like a baby? Is that also an issue?
That's a very important aspect when we have, for instance, new staff, or we have girls from national service who come to volunteer, or we have people who are not already well trained. That's what we have to embed in them very, very deeply. These are people, so they act like children. They're on the level of a 4-year-old, but they are adults, they are respected elderly, they built the country, they founded families, they've done everything. So even though they do foolish things or they talk nonsense, we have to respect them. We have to be very careful how we treat them. They deserve to be treated as and respected, despite their and respect for the elderly is like one of the mottos, one of the main things that we try to have in Melabev, in any conversation with elderly people.
That's beautiful. You know, in Japan there's actually a holiday called Respect for the Aged Day.
Here we have a week.
Is there?
A week for a month even.
What's that?
A month for the elderly. They don't put the word respect in, but the idea is you have programs, you give them reduction in the zoo, you make all kinds of products available to them, and so on.
Thank you, Leah. That's wonderful to hear and inspiring, and I learned quite a bit from you about, it's eye-opening to understand how to relate to elderly in a very different phase of life than most of us are exposed to.
Right. I think one of the additional non-recognized purposes of Melabev is to be a role model for the families, for the foreign workers who look after them, or for their caregivers in general, because when they see how the staff relates to the person, even when he's doing something which is very upsetting, or like I said before, repetition and so on, and how we deal with it. So it's also a school for how to deal with the elderly.
Are some of the patients coming to Melabev with their Filipino or Indian caregivers, and they're standing there?
Yeah, and very often, as I said, we have all these celebrations that we invite the family to, and we have open house whenever they want to come by and watch. Those who are very devoted and who are a little bit afraid to give over their family member. It reminds me of when we took the kids to nursery school and to kindergarten. We were very reluctant to leave. Can they really look after him? And especially if the kids were crying. I mean, that crying baby, you know, we kept him with us in our office the whole day. The kid adjusted very well. Similarly, we, first of all, very much encourage the new members to stay with their family member the first 2-3 times to get them used to it, till they get to know everybody and they see it's a non-threatening environment. But it's something we have to learn. Everybody has to learn.
Thank you, Leah. It's really enlightening to hear. Yes, and just to end by saying that just not long ago you were honored by Nefesh B'Nefesh with
we were talking about it before, together with Simon Smokey.
Yes, were you surprised to get this?
Whenever I get an honor, and Baruch Hashem Melabev has had many honors, I say it's the staff. We have anybody who stays working with us, like Jackie for 40 years, it takes a very special person. Those who don't really fit in, they sort of either get released or they release themselves. You need to have a personality. But I will say that Melabev this year is celebrating its 40th anniversary.
Very nice. Mazel tov.
And I think that's a very wonderful occasion to remind ourselves what our principles were and something about our achievements.
Yes. Thank you.
I want to thank you both. Really, it's been enlightening. It's been incredible. And thank you so very much.
It was a pleasure to meet you. And now I want to ask you something.